In this video, not only am I going to lay out the wide receivers I think you should be looking to sell going into week 2, but I'm also going to be identifying some potential trade targets and talking about the exact league settings in which you should be selling these players. For example, a player like Puka is a wide receiver that maybe you don't need to sell if you're playing in a 12-team format where you start 3 wide receivers and you have 2 flex spots and it's a full PPR league. Because there, if you're able to add in a wide receiver 3 to your fantasy football team, based on the depth of your starting lineup, a player like Puka is going to be the perfect guy to actually be a starter for you over the next month, potentially even longer, and he will actually make a difference in your starting lineup if you're able to start him as your wide receiver 3. If you're able to start him as maybe your 4th wide receiver, even 5th wide receiver. However, if you're going to be playing in maybe a 10-team format where you only have 1 flex, where the threshold for a player to make a difference in your starting lineup is going to be significantly higher than you would see the baseline otherwise, then in that kind of format, he's going to be the perfect name to take his current name value and see if we can go through, package him with another tertiary option, go and send maybe, say, Cortland Sutton and Puka, and go get a long-term upgrade at wide receiver 2. In that fashion, maybe you're going to send those 2 players and go get someone like T. Higgins, who we can feel comfortable starting from a week-to-week perspective and potentially has a higher long-term ceiling where the floor may not matter nearly as much. Now, the reason I would say Puka is going to be a sell and maybe as a cap ceiling in the long term will be twofold. One, the fact that while this Los Angeles Rams offense looked great week 1, I think if we look at Las Vegas sportsbooks and what they're telling us about this team going forward, this isn't necessarily a spot where we should assume that just because the Rams scored a ton of points week 1, that this is something that we look to continue to happen going forward. I mean, if we're going to go ahead and look at the spread that we have with this game in week 2, now keep in mind, may not be the best spot to look, may not be the most predictive long-term, because they are going up against the 49ers. We know the 49ers have arguably the best or second best, or at the very worst, 3rd best defense in the NFL. But nonetheless, the Rams are 8-point dogs or 7-point dogs, depending on the sportsbook that you were looking at. If you look at their implied team total, Las Vegas sportsbooks are going to tell us that the Rams are going to have a bottom 5 offense in the NFL this week. Now, of course, that may change. Of course, Las Vegas sportsbooks can always be wrong, but on the whole, they are smarter than I am. They are smarter than you are. They have all the data at their disposal. They have everything to lose, and that's the reason we are going to be looking at Las Vegas sportsbooks, the data that they put out, and we are going to be trying to implement that in our fantasy football leagues to make the best decisions possible. So if we're going to look at implied team totals in week 2 and see, okay, well, yeah, the Rams are supposed to be a very bad offense. Yeah, we probably don't want to go through and start Puka. Going forward, this may not be the case, but we need to look at the shelf life you're going to get from Puka specifically in those shallow formats where we necessarily can't start a wide receiver that's the wide receiver 24, wide receiver 25, wide receiver 26, and we're better to parlay them and see if we can get an upgrade somewhere else. If you can't start them week 2 against the 49ers, you get 2 more weeks until Cooper Kupp potentially comes back. Kupp may be back against the Philadelphia Eagles in week 5, and if that's going to be the case, you really only have Puka as a wide receiver that we're able to start, or at least are excited to start, against the Cincinnati Bengals and the Indianapolis Colts. So I do want to reiterate, there are specific formats you should look to hold this man, specific formats that you should look to sell. Please understand where your team currently is, and if he is currently on your bench and he's your wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, you just picked him up off the waiver wire, I would love to go through and see if we can capitalize on the free value and get that long-term upgrade in the starting lineup. Now, going over to our next wide receiver, I do want to just mention Sutton briefly. Okay, with Sutton, y'all know I've been a long-time hater. I mean, I will say I'm a hater. I'll admit it. Okay, but nonetheless, wide receiver, it's never been a top 24 guy from a points per game perspective. I thought he was actually viable week 1 because you had no Jerry Jeudy. He comes through with the receiving touchdown. So yeah, Cortland Sutton scores fantasy points, but will this be predictive going forward? Probably not. I mean, at the end of the day, you had Samaje Perine and Adam Troutman actually having more receiving yards than Cortland Sutton week 1. Long-term, we get Jerry Jeudy in. Long-term, Marvin Mims is going to continue to take a larger and larger role. Now, I'm not an idiot. I understand you're not going to be able to go out there and sell Cortland Sutton straight up and get a player very excited about. But more so, we're going to look to use Sutton maybe in a package like Puka, which we just mentioned, in those shallower overall leagues and try to make that 2-for-1 deal for a potential long-term upgrade. If you can take, say, a player like Cortland Sutton and a player like Puka and go get T. Higgins, that's the perfect spot. That's the perfect move to use. Now, going over to our next wide receiver, Jahan Dodson, similar boat. Now, with Dodson, I kind of got suckered in. I kind of got excited about what he could have potentially been week 1 if you had no Terry McLaurin. Well, McLaurin ended up playing, and what was most concerning is not the target volume that Terry McLaurin saw. I mean, it's pretty safe to say that Terry McLaurin is probably going to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense in the long term. But what's kind of concerning is the fact that Curtis Samuel still goes out there, leads the team in receiving. Logan Thomas leads the team in targets. So the issue is this is going to be another one of those small offenses where you don't have a lot of points to go around. I mean, hell, this week, Las Vegas Sportsbooks had the Washington Commanders as the 3rd worst offense in the NFL, only behind the Arizona Cardinals and New York Jets. And you have Terry McLaurin getting the largest slice of this pie going forward. You have John Dodson taking a small sliver, especially if we have Curtis Samuel and Logan Thomas taking pieces as well. I'm going to be fully honest, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't think there would be a single game this year that Logan Thomas had 8 targets. If you have a viable tight end in Washington, there's no way in hell that the wide receiver 2 has a ton of upside. Going back to what we were talking about, similar to Puka, similar to Cortland Sutton, if you're in that like 12-team format where you have 3 wide receivers and 2 flexes, or if you're in like a 14-team league with 2 flexes, full PPR, there you probably keep Dodson. This is more so for that 10-team, 12-team league where you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, where these depth wide receivers don't matter nearly as much. Now, Jacoby Myers, another perfect sell in a format like that. Now, if you look at Jacoby Myers, what is crazy is this is a wide receiver that week 1 went out there. He had 2 touchdowns off of 10 targets. Can y'all take a guess on how many targets it took Jacoby Myers to see 2 receiving touchdowns early on in his NFL career? If we go through and do the math, his rookie season, 41 targets, 0 touchdowns. His second year he went out there, he had 81 targets and 0 touchdowns. His 3rd season, he finally falls into 2 receiving touchdowns, but after 248 targets. Jacoby Myers, through the first 3 years of his NFL career, had 250 targets and 2 receiving touchdowns. This is a wide receiver that we've historically seen. He will rack up target volume, but he is not going to score at a high clip. We have Devontae Adams, who's still going to lead this team in targets. With Myers, I'm not a fool. I know we can't just throw him away and go get someone that we really, really like straight up. But more so, these are wide receivers that we're looking to package. These are wide receivers that we're trying to upgrade somewhere else with. Now, going over to a wide receiver that maybe we can use as some trade bait, maybe we can get some real value for. Garrett Wilson has lost a tremendous amount of value with no Aaron Rodgers. I understand the days of you being able to sell Garrett Wilson for Devontae Adams, sell Garrett Wilson for A.J. Brown, sell Garrett Wilson for CeeDee Lamb, those days are over. But I am fine for selling Garrett Wilson at a loss, even with the Rodgers injury. Now, I don't want to tell you to go out there and sell him for Keenan Allen. I have him in Keenan Allen. I have him and Brandon Ayuk all ranked back to back to back in our rest of season rankings on flockfantasy.com. And of course, real quick, if y'all want to see our rest of season rankings on flockfantasy.com, we already posted our top 150 and tiers updated with all the injuries this week. If you want a free trial to flockfantasy.com, or if you want to check out any of the pick'ems that you can see in this video, you can go sign up to Underdog Fantasy. On Underdog, if you use promo code FLOCK, not only you're going to get all our rankings, but also a 100% deposit match up to $200. Plus, you will get a special Joe Burrow pick'em for Sunday night, more than less than half a passing yard. And also make sure you include Tua in your pick'em slip this weekend, because Underdog's going to be giving away $100,000, $10,000 to 10 separate people that include the Tua total yards pick'em in their slip. But yeah, make sure you use promo code FLOCK if you want all those specials, 100% deposit match, and our rankings. But nonetheless, with Garrett Wilson, we had to move him down to a wide receiver 2 in these rest of season rankings. And I understand everybody's going to say, well, Mason, he looked great this week with Zach Wilson. Did you not see his receiving touchdown? And yeah, I tweeted out once that receiving touchdown happened that was confirmation that if Aaron Rodgers would have been the starting quarterback this season for the New York Jets, that Garrett Wilson would have been a top 3 wide receiver in fantasy. But we cannot understate how bad Zach Wilson is for this offense. This next week, Las Vegas sportsbooks have the New York Jets as the worst offense in the NFL with an implied team total of 16 points. Yes, 16 points. At the same time, if we're going to look at what you have with Garrett Wilson and Zach Wilson together, Garrett Wilson averaged fewer than 50 receiving yards last year with Zach Wilson. Garrett Wilson averaged 6 targets last year with Zach Wilson, and he averaged 8.8 fantasy points per game. In the 8 games with no Zach Wilson last year, that pretty much doubled to 17.5. He had 11.38 targets. He was on pace for 1,400 receiving yards with no Zach Wilson. I'm sorry to say it, ladies and gentlemen. Zach Wilson is a bottom 3 quarterback in the NFL. And the trade that we're looking to make with Garrett Wilson is I want to package him and one of those wide receivers we previously talked about in this video, whether or not that is, say, Puka, Sutton, or Myers. And I want to go and get in the tier of Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, Calvin Ridley, or if somehow we can get Amon-Ra St. Brown, that's the move that we're looking to do. Now, our next wide receiver we're going to go over to will be DK Metcalf. Metcalf, great week 1. I mean, the man went out, had 47 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown. And yeah, this is an offense that only had 112 passing yards overall. Now, full transparency, the Seattle Seahawks offensive line decimated last week. So I don't think we can just say, okay, well, yeah, I mean, Geno Smith is a bad quarterback, but nonetheless, I still am worried about Geno Smith here. And what I'm worried about is the fact that Jackson Smith-Njigba is fully healthy. JSN was tied with 5 targets in this offense with DK Metcalf in his first NFL game ever. So if all of a sudden we are going to be looking at a spot where you have this offensive pie immediately getting split in thirds between DK Metcalf, between Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Tyler Lockett, I don't know if Metcalf's going to be able to see a 25% team target share every single week. And that would be fine if you're in an elite level offense. Obviously, if DK Metcalf is over there and he's in Kansas City, DK Metcalf's probably a top 5 to 6 wide receiver in fantasy. It's just going to be a much, much tougher situation if you look at the overall environment, if there's not enough passing volume to go around in this offense, as well as the ascension of JSN this early on in the season. Now, our next wide receiver, I will be very brief. He is definitely not a must-sell guy under any circumstances. Hell, Michael Pittman was one of my most drafted wide receivers on Underdog Fantasy because we are getting him as wide receiver 40 this offseason. Freaking loved the Michael Pittman Jr. price tag this offseason, and I am not selling him for just anything. Michael Pittman Jr. goes out there, he dominates almost 100 receiving yards, receiving touchdown, 8 receptions, and Anthony Richardson looked like a pretty damn good quarterback in week 1. I just want to go through and look at a list of wide receivers that I would sell Michael Pittman Jr. for, even if this is someone that I've drafted a ton, strictly because at the end of the day, I do think that this is going to be an offense where Anthony Richardson vultures so much of the production himself with his overall rushing ability. If we could go through and sell Michael Pittman Jr. and get back T. Higgins, if we could get back Cooper Kupp, get back Devonta Smith, get back Brandon Ayuk, get back Amari Cooper, get back Keenan Allen, those would be wide receivers I'd want in return. Now, I would imagine that 90% of those owners would say no if you offered them Michael Pittman Jr. So be prepared to see a lot of rejections. But if we wanted to go through and send out those 5, 6, 7 offers, if the T. Higgins owner is going to go out there and panic and send you T. Higgins off a 0-point performance for Michael Pittman Jr., we will take advantage of that because I still don't think there's a ton of passing volume in this offense going forward. But like I said, I drafted the hell out of him. I don't think you need to go out there and sell him. More so just let's get a temperature read on the situation. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging out with us. And if you have not done so already, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want to check out any of the pick'ems that you saw in this video, you can find that link to Underdog Fantasy in the description, in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, you're going to get a 100% deposit match up to $200. You're going to get our 2023 fantasy football rankings. And also, you're going to be getting a special Joe Burrow pick'em, more than less than half a passing yard against the Baltimore Ravens this Sunday. Please remember, include Tua in one of your pick'em slips. That way you get entered in to win. Underdog's going to be giving away $100,000 to people who include their special pick'em every single weekend this football season. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you. I really hope you have a great day, and I really hope I get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.